the Slack channel, and we'll share it in the Mass Action newsletter. So, welcome to this month's Indivisible Mass Coalition as we have a conversation with Tanisha Sullivan, candidate for Secretary of State. Unfortunately, Bill Gavin cannot join us. He sent us his regrets. He could not attend. He had another conflict on his schedule. Before we begin, I'm going to take a few minutes to quickly remind us of our meeting norms and make a land acknowledgement. And I will share my screen with everybody. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Trying to get to the loading. Okay, great. So, welcome all. Quickly, our meeting norms. We all assume that everybody has come on this call with good intentions. Please introduce yourselves on the chat, as Lori reminded everybody before. All attendees, please stay on mute so that we can hear our guest speaker well. Any questions that you want to ask, please put in chat. So just type ask in front of your questions so we can easily find them. And then resource links will be shared in the chat. You can click on the link that's shared in the chat and a new page will open in another tab. We'll also send the links to you after the call. And I'm trying to move to the next slide. There we go. So tonight we have a land acknowledgement. It's adopted from Joan Lester's own written land acknowledgement. She's a member of the Indivisible Mass Coalition Racial Justice and Equity Team. Joan wrote, "Wherever you go in America, you are on indigenous lands. Tonight, we acknowledge that those of us who live in Massachusetts are now on the lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation tribe also the Wampanoag tribe of the Aquinnah Gayhead of Massachusetts, the Nipmuc Nation, and the native residents of Herring Pond. We recognize their legacy, their ongoing strength, resilience, and their continuing presence." The agenda, very briefly for tonight, we'll do some quick introductions. We will turn it over to Tanisha, where she will talk to us about her Secretary of State candidacy. Then we will have about 30 minutes of Q&A with Tanisha. We'll get some updates for the statewide weekend of action, and then we'll have some announcements and conclusions. And again, please remember to introduce yourselves in the chat and type ask with your questions. All right. Next, I want to quickly acknowledge some of the board members that are on the call tonight. I introduced Lori already. Let's see who else is here. Patricia O'Connor is rep from the 2nd Congressional District. Rachel Horak is our rep from the 8th Congressional District, and I believe that is all from the board tonight, unless who else is here?
I'm Karen.
Oh, Karen, sorry, missed you. Thank you, Karen Notavalley, congressional rep, rep from our 1st Congressional District. Thank you, Karen. Did I miss anybody else? Who else is here? Okay, good. Thank you. Welcome. All right. Hang on to make sure we've got this going here. All right, so now, finally, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Tanisha Sullivan, candidate for Secretary of State. Tanisha has deep roots in Massachusetts, was born in Boston and raised in Brockton. She attended Thayer Academy in Braintree. She graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in government and then graduated from Boston College with both her JD and her MBA. She practiced law in large firms and life sciences companies in Greater Boston and New York City. From 2013 to 2015, Tanisha served as Chief Equity Officer in the Boston Public Schools. In 2017, Tanisha was elected to serve as president of the NAACP of Boston in a volunteer capacity. There, she led the organization in its fights for racial, economic, and social justice with data-driven, solution-oriented framework. As a civil rights organization, voting rights is a priority for the NAACP, and Tanisha has led the efforts to expand access to the ballot box and make our communities more representative. Welcome, Tanisha.
Thank you, Deb. Greatly appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to be with you all this evening for a little bit of time. And I want to, I certainly will take a bit to do an introduction, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight. As Deb shared, I did grow up in Brockton. I am in my 20th year of legal practice, and I am a civil rights leader. A civil rights leader who has a track record of deeply engaging with our communities to advance economic, racial, and social justice here in Massachusetts. We have taken on some really tough fights on some sticky issues. And we've been successful, primarily because we've always believed, I've always believed in the power of community, and have always had a deep belief that when it comes to some of the biggest issues facing our society, that the answers actually reside within our communities. And, when I think about where we are in this moment in our democracy, we are facing, no doubt, probably the biggest issue, biggest crisis of many of our lifetimes, and that is the attack that our democracy is under. The fact of the matter is we find ourselves today really on the verge of, at best, an ideological civil war that is attacking so many of our democratic institutions in ways that none of us could have anticipated. That we would have a Congress that is so stalled and unable to get anything done for families across our country, that we would have a Supreme Court that has become clearly a political tool, leading to not only a situation where we're not able to advance civil rights here in our country, but where we're seeing the rolling back of rights that so many of us have fought for, and so many fights that we thought we'd won. And it could not be more clear at this moment just how critically important the office of the Secretary of State is. How critically important it is for this office today in 2002 to be an active participant in not only the protection of our democracy, but the advancement of our democracy. How critically important it is for this office to be an office that is proactive in identifying opportunities to use its power, to use its executive authority to really help improve quality of life for families and residents across the Commonwealth. In this moment in our history, as it has become clear to all of us just how critically important it is, how critically important the work we do at the state level is, our Secretary of State's office has to be transformed into a better community partner, into a more actively engaged office, and into an office that is truly focused on ensuring that, yes, we have a strong democracy, but that it is vibrant and that it is inclusive of all of us. And so I'm excited about our conversation tonight. Through the Q&A, my hope is that You'll get a better sense of what the full portfolio of this office, and most importantly, you'll get a better sense of my vision for this office, and how I believe, most importantly, we're going to be able to get the job done. So, Deb, I look forward to getting started with the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And first, I want to say thanks to everybody who submitted questions. We had lots of questions submitted. Many of them were very similar, and a lot of them were focused on voting. So let me just pull up the voting, and we start there. There were several topics that were approached as we looked at all the questions that came in. We have one on voting, one on the challenge to our democracy and the coup experience and what's coming at us. And the rest is about transformation of the office. What will you do? How will you do it? What else can you do? So we begin with acknowledging that the the Votes Act has passed here in Massachusetts. And many questions still exist. And right now, there are several questions that came in about access to vote and same-day voter registration. So please tell us how you would expand voter access and how you think about same-day voter registration, and what steps would you take to help same-day voter registration pass in the state legislature?
Okay. So, and I may break them up because I think there are probably 3 questions in there. So, I think first it's important for us to acknowledge that that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the advancement of voting rights here in Massachusetts. The fact of the matter is that in Massachusetts, we have not taken a leadership role to advance voting rights. And the result of that is, what we've seen this year. Yes, the Votes Act has passed our legislature, and included in the Votes Act was, of course, vote by mail. Now, we celebrate the passage of the Votes Act. We celebrate that we now have vote by mail in Massachusetts, but we've got to really be honest with ourselves that vote by mail is a voting right that residents and citizens in other parts of the country have enjoyed since at least the early 80s. And here we sit in 2022 in Massachusetts, just now realizing this right. And quite frankly, realizing this right in response to a global public health pandemic. Likewise, when we think about where we are with same-day voter registration or election day voter registration, there again, unfortunately, it was not included within the most recent voting reforms package. But again, we have a voting rights advancement that was adopted in Maine in 1973. That's nearly a half century ago. Time after time, we are given examples of just how far behind Massachusetts is and how reactionary we are when it comes to the advancement of voting rights. And I can tell you as a civil rights leader that's a problem not only for us here in Massachusetts, but it presents a problem in the fight nationally. Because so many states look to Massachusetts as the example because they believe we should be the example when it comes to these issues. And so for me, I do believe that when it comes to the advancement of voting rights, we've got to get same-day voter registration done, or election day registration across the finish line. The reason being is because Massachusetts is experiencing deep voter participation gaps. And those voter participation gaps most readily impact BIPOC communities, working people, low-income communities. And one of the voting rights that has been demonstrated time and time again to help increase voter participation among those groups specifically is same day or election day registration. So if we want to have an inclusive democracy, if we want to increase the rate at which some of our most vulnerable communities are actually engaging in voting, same day or election day registration really is one of the most important things that we could do, one of the most important policies we could pass. That being said, I think it's also important for us to understand that if we want to increase voter participation, we cannot continue to solely focus on breaking down administrative barriers to the ballot box, meaning we cannot continue to only focus on advancing policies like automatic voter registration or early voting or same day voter registration. All of those are very important, critically important, I would argue, when it comes to voting rights. But those alone, and breaking down administrative barriers alone, is not going to help us truly tackle the deep voter participation rates that we're experiencing. The reason being is that when we talk with folks in community, when we're trying to register folks to vote, when we're encouraging folks to get out the vote in many of our vulnerable communities, what we hear, and some of you may have heard this too as you're out there, my vote doesn't count. We elect these people to office and they don't do what they say they're going to do. Government doesn't work for us. These are responses that are indicative of a broken relationship. These are responses that are indicative of distrust with government. And so in order for us to really be able to get at the root of the issue, in an effort to increase voter participation, yes, we need to continue with the administrative policies, but we also have to work to restore trust and build relationships in these communities. And there is no office in our state government that is better suited or positioned to do that than the Office of Secretary of State. I believe that this office needs to be more actively engaged in our communities, physically present in our communities, showing up to work alongside trusted community-based organizations, to work alongside elected officials and other community stakeholders, to again help to build those relationships, help to restore trust between some of our vulnerable communities and government, that can then lead to us being able to inspire, motivate, and encourage people to actually cast a ballot. This is, I think, what I would describe as the evolution of the work in the voting rights space. For those who are history buffs, you know that, in this leading up to the Voting Rights Act, the fight really was to ensure, to help ensure that people could register to vote. And so that's been the path that we've been on for the last 4 decades. But we're now at a point in our democracy, the evolution of our democracy, where it's not just about the administrative pieces of registering people to vote and people having access to the ballot box. We're now at an evolution in this in an evolutionary stage where we've got to work on the relationship piece.
Okay, thank you. The next one is about voting by mail, and the question submitted asks, do you support a total vote by mail system such as in Oregon or Washington state? Why or why not?
So, before I answer that question, I want to go back just really quickly to same day because I left off the last piece. With respect to same day voter registration or election day voter registration, again, we've got to get it done. We cannot continue to be on this cycle. And so, as Secretary of State, I will not only fight for it and champion this important policy.
Oh, this is Tanisha, if you're interested in hearing her.
Sorry, we are letting her answer. If you could please
Secretary of
mute
State.
and submit your question via the chat. Thank you.
But I will also, work to ensure that ensure that we're working alongside our voting rights community, and working to help educate communities writ large on this policy so that we've got greater support coming from communities to help ensure that we get it done. And if that means that we ultimately have to take it to a ballot question, then so be it. But in an ideal world, we will be able to, truly advance this through our legislature. As it relates to vote by mail, I am a supporter of vote by mail, but I think it's important to note that vote by mail, again, when we're talking about increasing vote by mail as an administrative tool to break down barriers to the ballot box and to make it easier to vote, is a good policy. Okay. When we're talking about increasing voter participation, especially among some of the vulnerable communities that I referenced earlier, I think it's important to know what the data tells us about the rates at which people of color actually vote by mail. Vote by mail is not pre-pandemic. Vote by mail was not a method that folks in communities of color readily used. What researchers tell us is that, again, another reason for that is lack of trust. A belief that folks want to see their ballot go into the box, because of how disenfranchised communities have historically been. So vote by mail has not historically been pre-pandemic a tool that communities of color have used. Even through the pandemic, what we saw when communities of color were using vote by mail, there were higher rates of ballot rejection among communities of color than white counterparts. And so what all of this tells us is that, yes, vote by mail should be available, and passing the law, having the flexibility is not enough. There has to be additional work done by government, I believe the Secretary of State's office, to help, again, build trust in the process, and also help to ensure that when ballots are cast, that they are actually counted. And when we see disproportionate rates of rejection in certain racial or ethnic communities, that we are ready very quickly to ensure that we've got remedies in place. With respect to adopting an all vote by mail process, I think there are actually 8 states that have all vote by mail, including Washington and Oregon. I am, for the reasons previously articulated, I'm hesitant to say that we should be all vote by mail. I do believe having the option for people to actually walk their ballot into a polling location and allowing folks to see that ballot go in and the ticker move is really important to help build and maintain trust. But again, having the flexibility, I think, is also very important in the process.
Great, thank you. The next one builds off of something you just touched upon, and the question is, how will you ensure fair and secure elections?
This is probably, one of the most important aspects of the role. The Secretary of State is the chief elections officer, but yes, the Secretary of State's also the chief information officer, the chief corporations officer, the chief regulator, and has an important role to play as it relates to access to information, and also, I believe, helping us tackle economic inequality. That being said, ensuring that we have safe, secure, and inclusive elections that we can trust is a cornerstone to our democracy. And so, as Secretary of State, I will continue to prioritize election security and make sure that Massachusetts is or becomes really the leader when it comes to the leader when as it relates to election security. And what I mean by that is, we know that in an increasingly digital age, in an age in which hacktivists are active, there are people who, wake up in the morning thinking about ways to attack our systems, that it's really important that we also have folks who wake up every day working to ensure that we are secure. We've got to stay 10 steps ahead of those 10 steps ahead of bad actors. And so we will ensure that we've got not only internal resources dedicated to this effort, but that we're also partnering very closely with the technologists and the cybersecurity experts and other thought leaders to help ensure that, again, Massachusetts is on the vanguard when it comes to this issue.
Okay, Lori, do you want to take the next step? We are
Yes.
switching topics slightly.
Yes, switching to topics. Yes, hello, Tanisha. These topics are at the forefront of everybody's minds these days. So it's a more broad nationwide type view that we're going to take for the next 3 questions or so. The first one is, a lot of us on this call are not in the metropolitan Boston area. We are out in the more rural parts, and we come across the types of conversations and the types of people who agree with a Republican-backed coup happening. And we're wondering how you would deal with that sort of Republican-backed coup activity that might be happening here in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what is important for folks to know is that I am going to ensure that we are fighting back against any attempts to disrupt our democracy or to attack our democracy, as we have seen in other parts of the country. And most importantly, Lori, I'm not going to wait and be reactive.
Right.
We are going to be proactive, really, one, ensuring that we're prioritizing education, because part of what helps these types of activities to be successful is a lack of understanding, lack of education, where folks become more susceptible to misinformation or disinformation. So being proactive as a chief information officer and ensuring that we're getting good information into our communities that people can trust is one of the most important proactive measures that we can take. But in addition to that, when these types of activities rear their heads, as Secretary of State, I will use every available executive tool to fight back against them. It's similar to, what I've said in recent weeks about the rise of white supremacy here in Massachusetts, the overt presence of white supremacists in Massachusetts. It's critically important that we not let even the slightest activity go unchecked. And so as Secretary of State, I will certainly, again, work to ensure that we are being proactive, but also when these issues do come up, that we are responding appropriately and firmly to them.
That's great. And of course, as you well know, the two are connected intricately.
Yes.
And anyway, that brings us in, to the next question, which is, what if in 2024, the Republican presidential candidate initiates another type of coup similar to January 6th in 2021? And what would you do, or what could you do as Secretary of State of Massachusetts?
I'm sorry, Lori, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So if in 2024, the Republican presidential candidate initiates a coup similar to what we saw on January 6th, what can you do as Secretary of State of Massachusetts?
Yeah, I mean, I think our Constitution is clear that those who engage in insurrection against our country, those who have taken an oath of allegiance to our Constitution, like a Donald Trump, who engage in insurrectionist activity and are found either by our Congress or by a court of law to have done so, that we would have the ability to keep those individuals, someone like a Donald Trump, off the ballot. I think what I want to make clear here is I will use, again, every available tool of this executive office and work in close partnership with our legislature and our governor to ensure that we are doing all we can to keep those types of individuals off the ballot, because that is in the interest of our country. Not just our Commonwealth, but in the interest of our country and of our democracy.
I think you sort of preempted the next question, and that is about keeping insurrection the ballot. And I think a lot of us are very concerned about the fact that actually having an indicted and convicted insurrectionist isn't going to happen anytime soon. And is there anything that you can do to keep those that participated or coordinated the January 6th insurrection off of the ballot now without that conviction?
Yeah, again, as it relates from a constitutional standpoint, there are specific instances in which we are able to keep someone off the ballot. And so certainly we will look to, again, use every available legal tool to keep those individuals off the ballot. But I'm also, I'm a lawyer. And what I
Yeah.
know and understand about the law, and especially the way in which, from a civil rights lens, we've been able to advance civil rights. What I know to be true is that sometimes we have to bring a case that, or we may have to bring a case that challenges and forces us to really stretch the boundaries of how we think about the law. And so what I mean to what I'm saying is, I am not opposed to challenging someone being on the ballot in a way that would cause us to really stretch conventional thinking about specific laws. Okay. Sometimes we bring cases in order to push our law and our legal system forward. These are the lessons that we learn from, again, movements like the civil rights movement. And it's why, again, when I think about this office and the reason I'm running now, what we need in this office is just different today than what we've needed in this office 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're at a different point in our democracy. And so it requires not only certainly a certain set of skills, but it requires a certain different lens on how we can not only protect but advance at this particular moment. And having both my technical experience as a lawyer, but even equally as so, my civil rights experience, I think, is critically important and valuable in this moment.
That's a great answer and unexpected. And I would like to drill down on it more, but I don't know if we have time. But can I ask one furthermore question, Deb?
Sure.
Yeah. Are you saying that it might be possible to keep, I'm going to be explicit, to keep Donald Trump off of the Massachusetts ballot, even if he's not convicted at the federal level of being an insurrectionist?
Lori,
And
I don't know.
I'll add to that.
Okay.
So we'll get even more specific. So applying the key, I think, given the questions and what we've read and are aware of, is enforcing Amendment 14.3, barring insurrectionists from
Yeah.
the ballot. And could you see yourself doing that, given all the information that the committee has put out there, the January 6th?
Yeah.
So that specific constitutional provision requires Congress to take action, right? In finding that Donald Trump is in fact, was in fact an insurrectionist, actively inciting and participating in, or requires a court order to the same. Okay, and so I want to be clear on that. It's not enough for us to all see it for ourselves. We are the jury at home, but there must be specific action either by Congress or by a court. Okay, so that's important for folks to know. Absent that, and this goes to Lori's question, what I'm saying is, I am, regardless of what Congress does, I am willing to, and I trust that it wouldn't be alone, because there'll be other secretaries of state of like mind, I'm sure. I am willing to and will look forward to working with other secretaries of state to keep him off the ballot. And if that means we're going to court, working with our legal community to put together a case that gives us the opportunity to at least fight for it. What I'm saying is, I'm not just going to take it, I'm not just going to take it, I'm willing to fight to keep him off, and ultimately, rely on a court decision to say that we're either justified or not.
Okay, great. No, thank you. That's really important to hear. It's 8:41, time check. We have about 5 more minutes allotted for this portion. So we have several other questions, but you've touched on a couple of them already. So I think if you could take a couple of minutes and address this one that we have not touched on at all. What steps do we need to take to change the Massachusetts primary to an earlier date, say in May or June, like many other states? what does that take in Massachusetts?
Um, it takes a proposal, and I actually this comes up quite a bit. It was surprising to me how much it has come up out on the trail. People really wanting to revisit our calendar, our primary calendar. I mean, certainly having a primary the day after Labor Day, the first day of school in some communities, is not ideal, and actually does lend itself to suppressing the vote. And so, in addition, really having such a late primary doesn't give our party, I'm a Democrat, doesn't give, so I'll talk in these terms, doesn't give the party an opportunity to really pull together its full slate of candidates and do the work necessary to enter into a November election, one that is competitive anyway, enter into a November election as one party, ready to take on any challengers. That said, we need a policy proposal. The office will have to work right alongside the legislature to get this done. There are many examples across the country of earlier primaries, so May or June primaries, and so we've got. This, unfortunately, is not a space where we will be trailblazing, but fortunately, it is a space where we've got a lot of examples, good working examples for what a calendar can look like. I do want to, because I'm not sure where it is on your list, Deb, but it's a perfect opportunity for me to fold this in. There was a question I saw earlier about town clerks. This is also an area where we've got to partner with town clerks. The Secretary of State is the chief elections official in Massachusetts, but I want to be clear, when it comes to election administration, it is our town clerks and local election officials that are getting the job done. They are the ones actually administering our elections. And it's the Secretary of State's office that should be there as a support and as a guide. And so to that end, I think it's really important for the Secretary of State's office to ensure that local town clerks and elections officials have access to the resources they need to continue effective election administration. And that includes financial resources as well as people resources. And for me, I think it's really important that town clerks and elections officials know that they've got a partner in the Secretary of State's office, and know that although we have 351 distinct elections systems, that the Secretary of State's office is one that is there to help ease the burden of election administration and not add to the burden of election administration.
Great, thank you. We'll go with two more. What steps do you need to take? We did that one. Quickly, if you could give us a couple of examples of changes you would propose for the Secretary of State's office, and then how would you implement those?
Sure. So from an operational standpoint, one of the biggest changes will be the physical presence of this office, active, ongoing physical presence of this office in our communities. One of the things that is most disturbing to me, most concerning to me, as I'm moving across the Commonwealth, speaking in community after community, is how few people actually know about this office. This is the chief democracy office in the Commonwealth, and the fact that the average person, and even even people who are actively engaged in government, don't know what happens through this office is a problem. And so we've got to change that because of how important this office is really to the vitality of our democracy. And so one of the things that I believe we can do very quickly to help address that issue is being present. And so I will have a unit that is dedicated to really that civic engagement between the office and our communities, and will have as its charter, being present in our communities. The office currently has two satellite offices, or two extension offices, one in Springfield, the other in Fall River. Those not only need to stay, but we need to add more across the Commonwealth. And again, in an effort for this office to be more visible, to be more present, to be really integrated into our communities, I think that's important. The second is for this, and this is beyond the voting rights work. I'm now shifting into some of the other areas. I believe that this office has to really expand its lens as it relates to serving our small business community. The reason being is Massachusetts has been noted time and time again as one of the most economically unequal states in our country. We have deep economic inequality here, and it cuts across racial and ethnic lines. What we know, though, is that small businesses are actually a way to help address economic inequality. And so specifically here in Massachusetts, the most expensive state to start a business, I will file legislation to adjust our fee schedule here in Massachusetts for registering a business with the Secretary of State's office. Currently, the fee is the same across businesses, regardless of size, regardless of revenue or profit. So you have a situation where my favorite coffee shop, Recreo, on Center Street in West Roxbury, is paying the same fees as my second favorite, Dunkin' Donuts. And so we've got to bring some fairness and equity to that system, because what I'm hearing from small business owners, those who might be registered as an LLC, for example, is that those registration fees can really make a difference for these businesses. And again, this is something that we could do today to help ease some of the burden. Secondly, I believe that this office can be a better service provider, a better public servant to our small business community by directly today, serving as a connector between small businesses and the resources that exist in other parts of government. If you're a small business owner, my mom was a small business owner who started 3 businesses from our kitchen table in Brockton. I've seen owner-operated small businesses and business owners. It's really hard work. And so anything we can do to ease that burden is helpful. And so this office, I believe, could very easily serve as a connector between the small business community and the Supplier Diversity Office for veteran-owned, minority-owned, women-owned businesses, a connector to entities like Mass Growth Capital, which has millions of dollars of technical support resources for our small business community. My point here is there's work that can be done through that corporations division that can really help us tackle economic inequality. And I believe that the office needs to be doing it, and we need to have an expectation that this office is more than just an administrative hub. The third piece that I would look at is really kind of just more broadly, and it really does capture all that I've described. The biggest change is that as Secretary of State, I am going to be looking for ways that this office can help clear pathways of opportunity and remove roadblocks that can really help to improve quality of life for folks across the Commonwealth. This will not be an office that is satisfied with just doing the administrative technical pieces of the work. This will be an office that is intentionally, by design, looking to be of service to the Commonwealth and to the people of the Commonwealth.
Great, thank you. And then I think the final question, unless Lori sees one really super question out there that we haven't touched upon yet. How do you plan to work with other secretaries of state around the country to ensure we model best practices?
This is critically important. I have, I've had the opportunity to have touch points with some secretaries of state already, sitting secretaries of state already across the country, from Pennsylvania to New Jersey to Colorado, I to California. And I really do think this is an important part of the work today. Again, we're at a critical point in our democracy, and it's important for us to acknowledge that we are in a space we've never been in before. And so there's no one who has all of the answers. And the only way that we are truly going to be able to advance our democracy, save it and advance it, is by working together, is by being very intentional about collaborating with other secretaries of state, sharing what we've got going on here, but also being willing to adopt some of the practices that have been implemented in other parts of the country. An example of that is the work that Dr. Shirley Weber has been doing in California around, that direct civic engagement, connection between her office and communities. Fantastic work in that space that is having an impact on communities across California, or the work that's happening in New Jersey around civic engagement. I look forward to building upon those relationships that have already started, but really working together to ensure that we've got a strong front line in the democracy defender fight with our secretaries of state.
Great, thank you. That was really terrific. If any other questions come in, we will send them to you. Also, we have collected questions for Bill Galvin, and equally we will send those to him as well, even though he was not able to participate in this call tonight. Thank you so much, Tanisha. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thank you. Bye. All right, so we will be moving on to the next part of our meeting, and I'll turn it over to Christine. Would you like to introduce Ann Shaw? Updates for the Indivisible Mass Coalition Weekend of Action on August 13th and 14th. And I have links. I have the sign up link and the toolkit link to share.
Thank you, Deb. That's great. Yes, we're excited that our first weekend of action is going to be August 13th and 14th. And we chose a weekend because we want to build on the momentum and energy that started at the Indivisi Gather with Ezra, and before that with the abomination of the Roe decision. So there's so much energy out there. But what we kind of noticed was, although as group leaders, if I can speak to the group leaders for a minute, we try to hold our weekends separate from our volunteer job because we're spending 40, 60 hours a week on this volunteer project. But our volunteers that are coming in, both new and existing, they are looking for weekend stuff because they have normal life, right? They have their kids, they have their job, all this stuff. So we are asking the group leaders to go above and beyond and help us create a menu of events for this weekend. It can be any activism you want, anything your group is interested in. It can be something that you're already doing on the weekend or a new thing, or you could just organize your group to attend somebody else's events. We have a toolkit with lots of ideas and lots of events already started, so we're really excited about that. And so we're hoping that your group might consider some small event to add to the toolkit or organizing to go to the toolkit. And then I just want to give you a preview. We're going to do this again in September and October because we want to build a volunteer community that will come together when it's get out the vote time. Shaw, did I forget anything?
No, you did great, Christine. Yeah, no. So, yeah, again, the key thing is this is an opportunity for all the groups to come together and actually, activate your folks or get them energized because midterms are coming up, and and so any event, frankly, an ice cream social is an event. Any event just to get people like in tune with things. We've got to get ready for the big election. It doesn't have to be election related, by the way, right? You can do the role, the women's rights, or gun, any issue you want. But by the way,
Climate action?
climate action. So, but this is your opportunity to get your team together, a group together, or people who haven't been involved recently, and say, hey, let's get together and do something. And there will be in the toolkit. There will be many suggestions that are prepared. That is, you can leverage those events with postcarding, I don't know, phone banking, texting, canvassing, a whole bunch of different stuff that you can just borrow and say, okay, I'm going to bring this particular one to my group this weekend, and that's fine. Or you can, use your existing or create a new one. I actually think ice cream social would be a good thing on a hot summer day. So,
He's rooting for ice cream.
yeah, I'm rooting. I'm also rooting for drinks, but I shouldn't say that. Okay.
So you mentioned texting, and I'm just going to jump in and say that we are going to be offering texting through Movement Labs. One of our board leaders, Debbie Hart-Klein, is leading that effort, and she has found out that on Sunday, August 14th, Movement Labs will be texting for Black Voters Matter to help get out the vote. So there will be over 1.5 million texts available on Sunday, August 14th. So this would be a great event. Lots of people like to text. It's a safe thing for people to do besides postcarding or letter writing. But you can do that while you have your ice cream social, or while you enjoy a little drink outside. No harm done. It's great to socialize, pull in the people you haven't seen in a while, bring in some new folks, and get the momentum going, and let's get this movement moving, because we do have some big, serious election work to do. And don't let the naysayers on the news tell you that we cannot win in November. We, the Democratic candidates, can totally win. All we need to do is turn out the Democrats to vote, and the other independent voters that voted for Joe Biden to vote for those Democratic candidates. I know that the Biden, likability rates, shall we say, are really low, but that really doesn't matter. They're not voting for him. They're voting on local issues for their local candidates, and they're much more aligned with the democratic issues that are rising to the surface now and protecting our democracy than they have been before. So just because approval ratings for Biden are low doesn't really translate into bad voter turnout, and doesn't have to translate into bad voter turnout, given what the Supreme Court has done with our right to an abortion and what it can do to our other rights that is kind of blatantly obvious now. That is a real driver for Democrats, unlike we have seen before. And I see a hand up. Jill, yes, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thanks.
I was just going to say that people are definitely interested. I'm a member. I'm the youngest member in Boston South End of the South End Seniors, and I said to the group in a Zoom meeting, are any of you interested? They're politically interested. Are you interested in sending postcards to swing states for the Senate races? 26 people signed up. And we have so many people signed up that I don't have enough postcards for them. So now we're going to do the Swing Blue Alliance letters to the districts in Pennsylvania. And then the postcards to swing states is about to do postcards to key districts for House races. So, I think people are highly motivated, and it's a great time to just get people engaged.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Jill. That is really helpful information. It is 9:02. I am going to end by making two very quick announcements, and I thank everybody for coming out tonight to the meeting. The next Indivisible Mass Coalition Coordinating Board meeting is next Wednesday, August 3rd. The open session is from 7 to 8, and everybody is welcome. I'll share the link in the chat. And then the other important event that's happening that the Racial Justice and Equity team is supporting is inviting you to attend the New Democracy Coalition's sit-in in Boston at City Hall on August 10th. The event is going to be from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And they're asking for as many participants as possible. We'll be putting a note in the newsletter this Saturday with the sign-up link. This Boston sit-in is for racial justice at City Hall. And the reason is they are asking to change the name of Faneuil Hall, as Mr. Faneuil was a slave trader. And they believe that it is high time that we not name our state buildings for slave traders. And the key is they want as many people as possible, over 100, to meet at City Hall outside, have a sit-in, and then many people will go inside to meet with the city council. And then after that, march to Faneuil Hall and finish up the event there. And if Shaw's going, I know we'll all have lunch and a drink. So thank you all, and let me just share the link to sign up for the next statewide call next Wednesday evening. And thank you all for coming. It's great to have you. Thanks everybody for submitting really terrific questions and for prompting a great conversation with Tanisha. And I think we learned a whole lot from all the questions that were submitted, and how honest Tanisha and how well she answered them as well. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.